It's the last official day of the Supreme Court's term. We'll have the latest on a ruling over birthright citizenship and more on today's Texas Standard.
Texas Standard is a production of KUT Austin, KERA North Texas, Houston Public Media, and Texas Public Radio in San Antonio.
I'm Angela Kocherga in El Paso. We're tracking all of the court's activities, and we're watching dust from the Saharan Desert as it travels thousands of miles to Texas, creating hazy skies and air quality concerns. Plus, smaller herds mean higher beef prices. Our Michael Marks has all the details. The largest virtual school in Texas is closing. What happened to the Lone Star Online Academy? And the author of the Chismosas Only Book Club on friends bonding over books. All that and more ahead on today's Texas Standard. No matter where you are, it's Texas Standard Time on this 30th day of June, 2026. I'm Angela Kocherga, and so glad you can join us. On this last day of June, the last day of the Supreme Court's official term, the justices have issued some big rulings. One involves the 14th Amendment, which gives anyone born on U.S. soil the right to citizenship. President Trump signed an executive order attempting to end that right as he began his second term in office. It was immediately challenged as unconstitutional. The president argued the 14th Amendment was only added after the Civil War for the children of formerly enslaved people. He said it does not apply to others, including the children of people who entered the country illegally or those here on temporary visas. A majority of justices did not agree and upheld the right to birthright citizenship for anyone born here. In another ruling, the court allowed states to ban transgender athletes from women's and girls' teams. This is breaking news out of the highest court this morning. And joining us now with some initial analysis is Seth Chandler, a professor at the University of Houston Law Center. Professor, welcome.
Thank you.
What was the legal argument a majority of the justices used in striking down the president's executive order attempting to end birthright citizenship?
The majority said that when the Constitution says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States, it really meant all persons born or naturalized in the United States, with very limited exceptions. Those being children of ambassadors. If a hostile invading force gave birth, then that would be an exception. But otherwise, it meant the 14th Amendment meant what most people thought it had meant since it was enacted, and certainly since 1898 when the Supreme Court decided a similar case.
Well, I know we're just getting a first look at this, but how do the concurrences and dissents shape how you understand this opinion?
Right. So there is a concurrence from Justice Kavanaugh saying that he wasn't so sure that the Constitution required everyone to be born here to be a United States citizen, but that Congress, in enacting a statute that had declared all persons born in the United States were citizens, had made that was the applicable rule. And the importance of the Kavanaugh decision or a concurrence is that it leaves open the possibility for Congress to change its mind at some point in the future. But that's one vote. And basically, you've got 5 justices saying that the Constitution prohibits what President Trump attempted to do.
And what about the dissents?
Well, the dissents argue that subject to the allegiance, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, which is in the 14th Amendment, means allegiance. And just as the court had ruled that tribal Indians were not necessarily citizens of the United States under the Constitution, because they might owe their allegiance to the tribe, so too with respect to children of persons who were born of people who had not legally left their former country and were residing here illegally. That was the basis of their argument, that the subject to the jurisdiction thereof qualifier in the 14th Amendment would be interpreted expansively, but that position did not prevail.
Well, what did the court's ruling signal, if anything, about the limits of what they will allow when it comes to the use of executive power?
Well, it says 2 things. First, it suggests that for major changes, such as that President Trump was proposing, where at least there is a statute in place, the court was not willing to let the president just run roughshod over the statute. And the second is that, at least in this instance, it was willing to hold the president to a constitutional norm that had been obeyed by predecessors for, what are we up to, 158 years. That is, what does the 14th Amendment actually mean?
So what does this ruling mean for people who are at risk of losing their citizenship under the president's executive order if it went ahead?
Yeah, I think it means those people can stop worrying. That is, there's certainly was a great deal of concern about the possibility that the court would uphold the president's order. This is a definitive final ruling from the Supreme Court. I think it's one that the president may fume about, and he may want to try and get a justice who agrees with him. But I think for the foreseeable future, the rule that we've essentially had for the past 150 years, that if you're born here, with very, very limited exceptions, you are a citizen of the United States.
So what's your big takeaway from this decision, Professor?
My big takeaway is it's actually closer than I expected it to be, that you did get 3 dissents saying that they were willing to basically overturn a practice that had been in existence for a long period of time. But the other takeaway is that this issue, which has been contentious, is settled. It doesn't mean that there aren't lots and lots of other constitutional and statutory immigration issues of great import that are coming before the court or that have already been decided. But on this point, they were willing to overturn President Trump's very aggressive attempt to change the way birthright citizenship works.
And anything else that you're gleaning from both the concurrences and dissents from the individual justices?
Well, it's been half an hour and it's a 195-page opinion. And so I think I've done well just to get this far.
You've done great. And we really appreciate you sharing your insight with us this morning on this last-minute decision right before we went to air. So we've been speaking to Professor Seth Chandler. He's a professor at the University of Houston Law Center. Professor, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Data centers are spreading rapidly across Texas, supporting artificial intelligence, crypto mining, and the digital services people use every day. But these facilities require significant amounts of electricity and water. State lawmakers say they do not have reliable information about how much water the industry is consuming and how that will impact the state's water-scarce future. As Texas Public Radio's David Martin Davies reports, a recent legislative hearing revealed that most data centers surveyed by the state have not provided the required information.
Inside a Texas House committee room, lawmakers were trying to answer what sounds like a straightforward question. How much water are the state's data centers using? They did not get a straightforward answer.
Data centers have become a hot-button issue, dominating social media feeds and news reports.
State Representative Cody Harris chairs the House Natural Resources Committee. He acknowledges that almost everyone relies on data centers, from checking a map to scrolling through social media. But Harris said the rapid arrival of these industrial-scale facilities is causing conflict, particularly when companies refuse to explain their demands on local water and electricity systems.
When new developers like Diode Ventures enter a residential neighborhood intent on building a new data center and refuses to do any community town halls, refuses to discuss their water and electricity usage, and refuses to testify before this committee, then Texans rightfully get upset.
Water consumption varies widely. Some facilities use evaporative cooling, which can consume substantial quantities of water. Others use closed-loop systems or rely heavily on air cooling, potentially reducing direct water consumption, but they use a lot more electricity. And that creates another complication. Generating the electricity used by data centers can also require more water. Temple McKinnon is Water Supply Director for the Texas Water Development Board. She told lawmakers the agency's existing survey does not capture enough facility-level detail to calculate that complete water footprint.
Our survey doesn't get into that level of facility detail.
And the more immediate problem is that most facilities are not answering the state's survey. McKinnon said only 17% had responded to the survey.
For the year 2025 use, we have about a 17% response rate. 98% of those responses are showing they purchase water from public systems. About 2% are self-supplied.
But lawmakers stressed that those figures cannot describe the entire industry when more than 4 out of 5 surveyed did not respond. Representative Brad Buckley asked whether this was the same information used to prepare the state water plan, the document intended to anticipate the state's water needs for the next 50 years. McKinnon said it was.
Okay, so we're building a state water plan off of a 17% response rate.
Well, it's...
Yeah, so we have to do a lot of, whatever you call it, extrapolation.
Yes, we do.
That is a terrible response rate.
Harris said lawmakers could address that problem during the next legislative session.
The transparency of utilization of resources shouldn't be optional. And I think that that's just kind of a low bar that we're going to be looking to set next session is disclosing how much water is used and the source of it.
With incomplete information about how much water these facilities will consume, there are mounting concerns that data centers, if left unregulated, could make the state's coming water scarcity crisis even worse. I'm David Martin Davies in San Antonio.
Planning a 4th of July cookout, the cost of throwing a steak on the grill could go up even more. Dwindling cattle herds are part of the reason. We'll delve into the details. Also, hazy skies could be in the forecast for parts of Texas caused by dust that has traveled thousands of miles from the Saharan Desert. That dust may affect air quality, but it's also beneficial for agriculture. We'll explain. Plus, are you a fan of outlaw country? I am. Next, we'll take a look at its place in Texas music history. All that and more when The Standard continues.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Half Price Books, a Texas-bred new and used bookstore, proudly supporting public media and sustainability by keeping books, music, and other media in circulation. Store locations and more information at hpb.com.
I'm Matt Riley from KUTX, and as we look towards the 250th birthday of the United States, we're celebrating with the Texas 250, the Lone Star State's contribution to American music. Here's a moment when Texas music had the world's attention. April 1972. The restrictions and conservatism of the Nashville record labels and recording houses made Willie Nelson decide he'd had enough. So he left Music City and returned to his home state, landing in Austin. The burgeoning hippie music scene at venues like the Armadillo World headquarters reinvigorated Willie. His popularity in Austin soared as he honed his own unique sound, and he was eager to play live gigs in Texas without violating his 26-week residency requirement for the Grand Ole Opry. This move also spurred Willie to get out of his confining record contract with RCA, subsequently signing a much more lucrative deal with Columbia that granted him artistic freedom. His friend Waylon Jennings would soon follow suit, and thus began the outlaw country movement. The outlaw country movement was a rebellion against the formulaic and polished Nashville sound. The artists were now free to experiment with different styles and song structures, mixing in rock, jazz, and folk. Contemporaries Johnny Cash and Chris Christopherson would soon be among their ranks, and a new breed of country music took the nation by storm. In 1976, Wanted, The Outlaws, the compilation album by Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, Jesse Coulter, and Tom Paul Glaser, was the first country album to go platinum. Outlaw country was here to stay. The legacy lives on today with artists like Sturgill Simpson, Miranda Lambert, and Chris Stapleton. All it took was for Willie to move to Austin. You can see more about this moment at texasstandard.org/Texas250. And we want to hear from you. We're counting down the 250 essential Texas songs July 3rd and 4th on KUTX, and you can cast your vote for your favorite Texas song at texasstandard.org/Texas250.
And you are listening to the Texas Standard. Well, beef prices at the grocery store are already high, but they could rise another 10% before the end of the year, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And no, this is not being driven by the New World screwworm, at least not completely. The Texas Standard's Michael Marks reports on a more serious culprit, the size of the cattle population.
The U.S. cattle herd is at its smallest since 1951, according to the USDA. That's a big reason why ground beef hit a record $6.89 per pound earlier this year. The cattle population has gone down for 6 straight years, and industry watchers like Daryl Peel say it could keep shrinking.
We still don't know for sure that we actually have a low in place yet that would allow us then to turn around.
Peel is an extension livestock marketing specialist at Oklahoma State University. He says that the U.S. cattle herd generally expands and contracts in a predictable cycle. When there are few cattle available, like right now, ranchers can profit.
We've got essentially record high prices for cattle and for beef right now.
Those high prices normally incentivize ranchers to grow their herds. We are not seeing that happen.
But I think there's some good reasons we're not.
David Anderson is a professor and extension livestock economist at Texas A&M University.
One is, we continue to have drought problems around the country where we produce cows. So that's a problem. It just prevents you from growing.
Steady rains throughout much of Texas this spring have helped, but a lot of cattle country is still stressed from long-term drought. Again, here's Daryl Peel of Oklahoma State.
Starting in about 2021, really late 2020, up until even current times, we've had lots of drought conditions pretty much all over the country at some point in time. And so that forced producers to do more liquidation than they planned than they would have because of the normal cattle cycle.
Lack of available water can force producers to sell animals. Year after year of drought also has a compounding effect on pastures. They grow less grass, so ranchers can't stock them with as many cattle.
I've had to shrink my own cow herd to adjust to the feed that's available.
That's Kevin Buse of Hereford in the Panhandle. He's a rancher and the CEO of Champion Feeders, which buys cattle from ranchers, then sells them to meat packers after the animals gain weight. Although ranchers are benefiting from the high price of cattle, it's causing headaches for feedlot owners like Buse and for meat packers, which process the animal and package its beef.
I'm very concerned about where we're at with regards to packers shuttering plants. It's an extremely big deal.
The scarcity of cattle has cut into their bottom line. This year, meatpacking plants in Nebraska, Texas, Pennsylvania, and Tennessee have closed or reduced operating hours. The presence of the New World screwworm has made the problem worse. To try to prevent the pest spreading north from Mexico, the USDA suspended the trade of livestock across the border in May of 2025.
With us closing the Mexican border, that shut out a million to 1.3 million head a year for us in the Texas Panhandle. That's caused considerable amount of adjusting.
If more packing facilities close from year after year of scarce cattle, that could drive beef prices up even higher. Peel thinks that's possible in the near future.
At this point in time, particularly with very little prospects that cattle inventories are going to grow anytime soon, I would not be surprised to see some additional adjustments as we go forward. It's never clear exactly, who would do that or where or how, but it's certainly a distinct possibility.
People are still buying as much beef as they ever have, though, even with the high prices. Economists are monitoring whether that stays true as the cost continues to rise. I'm Michael Marks for the Texas Standard.
Well, Brazil and Japan helped kick off the knockout stages of the World Cup in Houston. The game got off to an interesting start when the Japanese underdogs scored a goal in the 29th minute. The crowd went wild, and the Samurai Blue held their lead for the entire first half. But Brazil has won 5 World Cups, and they're one of the top-ranked teams in the tournament, which meant they equalized in the 56th minute, and then with just moments left in the game,
Bruno Guimaraes. Oh, and here's a chance. Martinelli! Brazil have won it! They've stolen it right at the death!
It was a heartbreaking loss that sent Japan packing, and it isn't the only knockout game taking place here in Texas. Later today, Ivory Coast and Norway play in Dallas. Australia and Egypt play there on July 3rd, Dallas that is. A day after that, Canada plays Morocco in Houston. The United States plays tomorrow at 7 p.m. Central. We'll be following the rest of the tournament right here on the Texas Standard.
Support for Texas Standard comes from UT San Antonio, providing education and research for communities across Texas, with a focus on student success and workforce development. The University of Ambition, utsa.edu. Support for Texas Standard comes from Good Spread, an Austin-based mineral sunscreen brand seeking to make clean, reef-safe SPF for everybody under the sun. Now at H-E-B stores across Texas. More at goodspreadsuncare.com.
From the Texas Newsroom, I'm Matt Harrop. Saturday will mark the one-year anniversary of the deadly July 4th floods. Our Sarah Gruno says residents in Kerrville are paying their respects but weary about the area's preparedness for the next emergency.
Residents still have concerns about the flood warning system that's been installed along the Guadalupe River. Rebecca Murphy spoke at a community meeting in Hunt. She recalls the response to a 2015 flood in Wimberley, Texas, about 70 miles east of Kerrville.
The state, they did not fund warning systems. They knew we were at risk after Wimberley. A study was done.
This week, residents are paying respect to those who died in the deadly floods last year. Several events are scheduled this week in what's called a weekend of hope and healing, including community gatherings and the opening of a new park. More than 130 people died in the July 4th floods last year. I'm Sarah Gruno in Kerrville.
A nun from the Rio Grande Valley who was detained by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement over the weekend has been released. Our Maria Navarro reports the release came following a bipartisan effort from Texas lawmakers.
The League of United Latin American Citizens says Sister Leti Ubuaja was detained while on her way to Sunday Mass at Our Lady of Sorrows Church in McAllen. South Texas lawmakers Monica de la Cruz and Henry Cuellar said on social media that Sister Leti was released Sunday afternoon after the lawmakers worked with the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Mark Wade Mullen to secure her release. LULAC is demanding a full account as to why Sister Leti was detained and what safeguards will be put in place to prevent any similar incidents. I'm Maria Navarro in San Antonio.
Texas Republicans have taken a tough stance against in vitro fertilization. The GOP adopted a platform at its recent state convention that calls on lawmakers to, quote, protect fetal life from destructive practices such as IVF and commercial surrogacy. San Antonio fertility specialist Dr. Shelley Nichols says potential actions against IVF in Texas could limit options for women.
as Texas goes, so does the rest of the country. We saw that with a lot of our abortion restrictions that have carried over to other states. And what we have to do right now is educate and fight against any of these laws going into effect.
Dr. Nichols is also running as a Democrat for a state House seat. And U.S. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development Scott Turner visited Houston yesterday to highlight a $100 million allocation for backup power generators at city facilities. Houston is installing about 45 backup generators with federal recovery dollars awarded by HUD after Hurricane Beryl and the derecho wind event in 2024. I'm Matt Harrop in the Texas Newsroom.
Support for these Texas headlines comes from Texas Monthly, producer of Where the River Took Us, a podcast from the July 4th floods, from survivor Aaron Parsley's perspective, through the voices of his family and others, telling the story of grief, healing, and survival.
33 minutes past the hour, Texas Standard Time. I'm Angela Kocherga. Like clockwork, June through August, high winds over northwest Africa pick up large amounts of dust from the Saharan Desert and carry it west. This dust can travel more than 5,000 miles over the Caribbean Sea and eventually reach Texas. And then for the next few days, people with asthma and dust sensitivity may notice an uptick in their symptoms. Here to tell us more is Mary Wasson, a newsroom meteorologist for the San Antonio Express-News. Mary, welcome back.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, how is this possible? How does this dust travel so far from the Saharan Desert in the atmosphere to where it's visible here in Texas?
Yeah, well, like you said, it happens every year, every summer from June through August. And what happens is over the Saharan Desert, you have winds that kick up around 35, 40 miles per hour. And then it kicks that dust, the very fine particles of dust, up in the atmosphere. And then with the trade winds over the Atlantic, it moves it all the way into the Caribbean. And if there's nothing kind of in its way, it's going to move eventually into Texas. So once it arrives here, that's where you see that dusty looking sky and then also the air quality and allergy issues that come with it. But luckily, this latest plume that has moved through, it's going to be a quick hit. It moved through on Monday. It should be out of here by Wednesday.
So you anticipated my next question about the forecast for the dust, but which parts of Texas are affected?
Yeah, well, most of the time it's the coastal areas. So it's going to move along the Gulf and then kind of turn northward. So rarely do we see any of that out in West Texas. They kind of have their own issues with their own kind of dust storms. But for us, it's basically along the I-35 corridor all the way from the coast up into Dallas. And then it kind of moves towards the north and east and eventually kind of dispersing across the southeastern parts of the U.S.
Yeah, so I'm talking to you from West Texas. I'm very familiar with the dust out here. Well, how many dusty days can we expect this summer from the Saharan dust coming through?
Yeah, well, we are in an El Nino type of climate pattern, and that typically suppresses any type of tropical systems. So sometimes during certain years, if we have more tropical systems, we don't have as much Saharan dust. So this year, where it's going to be quiet, that Saharan dust kind of has a full trajectory all the way across the Atlantic. So we may see several more of these type of plumes this month and maybe even into August. But again, that's, something that happens every single year. Luckily, we haven't had a huge plume. This is the first one, and we're already almost into July. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we don't see too many more of these.
Well, you mentioned that when it comes to this dust, it's affected by storms in the Gulf. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, anytime we have the dust that kind of comes across the Atlantic, it suppresses any type of development with storms. The storms need that rising air, it also needs cooling temperatures as it rises. But with that very warm dust high up in the atmosphere, it kind of acts like a lid on top of the atmosphere, very much like high pressure here in Texas. So it suppresses a lot of those clouds to develop, which eventually over the tropics turn into some type of tropical cyclone, storm, or hurricane. So that's kind of what happens with the Saharan dust. This year, as I mentioned, we're in an El Nino climate pattern, which suppresses a lot of tropical storms anyway. So I don't see us having too many in the Gulf here in the next couple of months.
So tell us about the dust and agriculture. What does that affect?
Yeah, so once the dust comes across the Atlantic and into Texas, a lot of times it kind of rains down, eventually settling on our soil, and it provides a certain type of nutrients for things to grow, like phosphorus and things like that. So it's, not only does it affect our allergies, but it's also kind of good for our environment to kind of help things grow and green up here in Texas.
So what can people do if they notice they're having some symptoms related to this dust?
The best thing to do is just kind of limit your time outside, just like any other air quality issues. Just limit your time outside when you notice that the winds are blowing. Maybe take your allergy medicine that day, kind of get ahead of it. Again, this is going to be a pretty quick hit. Most symptoms will be kind of scratchy eyes, maybe a sore throat, but other than that, things should be okay.
We've been speaking to Mary Wasson, a newsroom meteorologist for the San Antonio Express News. Mary, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Texas is changing, and we're changing with it. Oye, Texas is a statewide bicultural newsletter written by editors and reporters from the Texas newsroom. It's a collaboration between NPR and public radio stations right here in Texas. Every week, we'll send a rundown of the most interesting news, arts, and culture stories from all over the state. Subscribe at oyetexas.org. Coming up on 39 minutes past the hour, and after the break, we'll have a conversation with an Austin-based author of a new children's book, the Chismosas Only Book Club. Stay tuned.
Support for Texas Standard comes from UT's Center for Professional Education, helping to guide professional growth every step of the way, with courses designed to improve professional skills, earn credentials, and make a career change. Details at professionaled.utexas.edu.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. Books can be magic, but for a lot of young people, they can also be something else. A refuge, a meeting place, even a way of making sense of friendships that can suddenly feel a whole lot more complicated. Austin-based author Lakin Zaya Kemp explores all of that in her new middle-grade novel, The Chismosas Only Book Club. The story follows Kat and her three best friends as they navigate the transition to high school. Determined to stay connected, they form a book club that meets at a family-owned bookstore founded generations earlier by Kat's ancestors. But as the pressures of growing up begin to pull the friends in different directions, well, the bookstore reveals a little magic of its own. The Chismosas Only Book Club was published right in time for the summer, and Lakin Zaya Kemp joins us now. Lakin, welcome to the Texas Standard.
Thank you so much for having me.
Your dedication reads, "To me circa 2003. What parts of your own adolescence found their way into Kat and her friends?
So the Chismosas Only Book Club is my ode to a very popular young adult series from the early aughts called The Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants.
Yeah.
So maybe listeners are familiar. It ended up being turned into this big movie franchise, but those were some of my favorite books from the time when I was in middle school and high school. And so that was the initial inspiration, was just wanting to capture that feeling of YA books from the early aughts. And I hope that I accomplished that.
Yeah, I was going to say this is a book about friendship, but in a way it's also about your own love of books in a sense, no?
Absolutely. I mean, it's hard not to be a lover of books as an author. I think that's a prerequisite. But I'm also a teacher, and growing up, I was always a voracious reader. And this project was the perfect opportunity to celebrate really the entire book ecosystem. What I love about readers, what I love about writers, what I love about storytelling, and what I love about independent bookstores.
So why did you want to focus on that transition into high school? What was it about that?
So as a teacher, I see, and I know a lot of librarians and educators that I've talked to also see that there's sort of a chasm in terms of books available for kids in 7th and 8th grade. Mm-hmm. And those are the students that I teach. I teach freshmen and sophomores. So I really wanted to write a book especially for them.
Oh, interesting. Say something more about Chismosas. I guess it can be translated as gossips almost, but in this book it's sort of a badge of honor, isn't it?
Correct. So I would say just in the Latino culture in general, being a chismosa is usually a positive thing. It's really someone who likes to storytell and share information with other people. In this case, the girls in the book are technically gossiping about fictional characters, so no one is actually being harmed by their gossip. Right. But I think it's a great way to frame a book club for young people because it's so important that they see reading as a social activity.
Mm-hmm. The bookstore itself feels almost like a character here. Tell me a little bit about the role that bookstores and libraries played in your own life.
Well, when I was in college, I worked in a library, but even before that, I used to live across the street from my elementary school, and I could see when the teachers would start arriving in the summer to get ready for the upcoming school year. And as soon as I saw my librarian's car in the parking lot, I would start walking across the street every day to help her set up the library. So I've always spent a lot of time in libraries. I've always lucked out and had really close relationships with all of the librarians that I had from elementary school, middle school, through high school. Mm-hmm. So I really wanted to pay homage to that as well.
You're also paying homage to something else here because there's a thread that runs through this story about ancestors and family history and the stories that we all inherit. Not something, I think, that you see that often in young adult books, or in books for young people this age, few and far between as they are. Why did you feel it was important to weave that into a contemporary coming-of-age story, in a sense?
Identity formation is happening, at a really rapid speed when you're in middle school and high school. And the first pieces of that identity formation are who are we within our family structure? And that includes, the people who came before us and how those family histories and family stories shape the overall family unit.
It's interesting that sometimes books and stories, there's a possibility in them that ordinary conversation doesn't open up. Sometimes, well, obviously in this story, the girls are connecting through books, but they're dealing with misunderstandings and growing pains and, in a sense, drifting apart, too. I sort of feel like you're pointing to how stories are sort of magic in a way in making those conversations possible that you can't have, face-to-face sometimes.
Absolutely. I mean, stories are just words. Stories are just language. And a lot of people, even adults, struggle with communication and the vulnerability required to be able to speak honestly with someone. So for the characters in this story, when they don't know how to express what they're feeling or when they don't even really understand what they're feeling, the books that they are reading are sort of the key to unlocking that understanding and that ability to be honest with their friends.
I think I read somewhere you believe that you see this book as sort of celebrating Chicana joy and resilience. Could you say more about that, what it meant to create a story where friendship and humor and family and community are all sort of at the center?
Those are goals of mine with every story that I write, but when it comes to the novels that I've published previously, I have tackled some more serious topics. There's always humor involved, but the Chismosas Only Book Club is my funniest book to date. And a big part of that is that there is an illustrative component. There are graphic novel chapters from one of the characters' points of view. And we get to see, all of the hilarious, ridiculous thoughts that she has behind the scenes and see those rendered in the most, hilarious illustrations done by Heidi Moreno. Mm-hmm. So it was really important for me to write a funny book. I think, especially when I was thinking about reluctant readers and how to hook those kids who maybe love graphic novels but haven't found a right fit prose novel yet, I was trying to think of as many entry points for them as possible, and humor is a big one. So that was really my priority this time around.
Well, now, when young readers do finish this book, what are you hoping they carry with them?
Well, at the end of the Chismosas Only Book Club, you actually get a full list of all of the books that the girls read in the story. And that is one of my favorite elements of the book, is that the books they read in their book club are real books that you can find in your local library, at your local independent bookstore. And so I'm hoping that it inspires kids to just keep reading more.
We've been speaking with Lakin Zaya Kemp. She's the author of the Chismosas Only Book Club, which is just out in time for summer, and it would be a real treasure for, well, some young people that we all know. Lakin, thanks so much for taking time to talk with us on the Texas Standard. Real joy and congratulations on the new book.
Thank you so much.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Mutual Insurance Company, committed to strengthening the state's workforce and its communities through safety and wellness grants and education initiatives. More at texasmutual.com/community impact.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. One of the fastest growing sectors in Texas public education is also one of its least understood. Enrollment in public virtual schools has exploded over the past decade, no doubt accelerated by the pandemic and families looking for alternatives to traditional classrooms. But this month, one of the state's largest online public schools with some 12,000 students abruptly shut down, leaving families scrambling, teachers out of work, and raising new questions about whether the pace of growth in virtual ed has outpaced accountability. Elizabeth Sander covers education for the Houston Chronicle. She's been reporting on what happened and what it might say about the future of online public education in Texas. Elizabeth, welcome to the Texas Standard.
Thank you for having me.
So just last May, this online school I'm talking about here, Lone Star Academy, was celebrating its growth. Leaders were predicting they'd be moving up dramatically in the state rating system. Then suddenly, what happened in June?
In June, the parent district, to my understanding, decided to not extend the contract with the private company that ran the virtual school.
What was this private district? Roscoe Collegiate ISD, is that right?
Yeah, so Roscoe Collegiate ISD is a public school district in West Texas, a pretty small district. It only educates about 700 students in person, but they have around 12,000 virtual school students through their partnership with Stride K-12, which is a private company that runs virtual schools around the country.
I see. How much of a surprise was this, though, really? Because as I understand it, and as you report, this Lone Star Academy have an F rating?
Yes, it did have an F rating in every year since it opened in 2021. So they were struggling academically, and there are a few possible reasons for that. I mean, virtual school is different than regular school. It's not in person, and it tends to have a more transient student population, students that might be coming in partway through their year, leaving before the year is over, and which has historically provided, a little bit more of a barrier to academic success for virtual schools. But yes, it was failing for a few years. Whereas the main school district, Roscoe Collegiate ISD, had A and B ratings in its in-person schools. So there's a bit of a disparity there.
I'll say. We should probably go into depth a little bit more on what a virtual public school actually looks like or is. I'm assuming this is mostly online classes. Is that right?
Yeah, virtual school is pretty much entirely online. There are different models. There's asynchronous, which, means students can do classes at their own pace. And there's also synchronous learning, which is basically like a regular school day, but in front of your computer instead of in a classroom. And these public schools that we're talking about, they're virtual and they're free because they're funded by taxpayer money through their partnerships with school districts. But there are also private virtual schools as well that are tuition based.
You mentioned some of the reasons why students in this virtual school might be struggling, and I guess why their rating might have been so low. Was it the fact that this one district in West Texas pulled the plug? It seems to have to create a lot of chaos, though. I mean, we're talking about 12,000 students who were expecting to return to this virtual school next year?
Yes, it's actually almost the size of a small district in Texas, right? It's a lot of students who, I spoke to one parent who said that as of the last day of school, they had no reason to believe they weren't going to be going back to school at the same, online program that fall. It's not the same amount, it's not the same as a regular school closing in the sense where it's not a brick and mortar building, there's maybe no transportation changes, but these parents and these children will end up, in a different program in the fall. And just to note, representatives from Stride K-12 told me they're trying to place all of the students from this public virtual school in one of their other public virtual schools in Texas. And maybe they're offering some tuition-free spots at a private school that they run online as well. So they're trying to place all these students in a new virtual program, but it will be different and most likely with different staff and different students.
But how well are virtual schools doing, broadly speaking? I mean, I would think that you would have to have a pretty self-motivated student to succeed in some of these asynchronous courses.
Yeah, definitely. You need to have a level of self-motivation to want to get up and do school every day when, there's maybe no bus or there's no classroom. A lot of students that do virtual school are very motivated, but I think that it just provides, a higher level of variance to the different students that are in these programs and the different needs they might have. And also, I think as we understand it, virtual school is relatively new compared to other forms of education. And all-day virtual school for this many students, I think we actually spoke about a year ago about how it's grown so much. I think it's like 1,200% or something like that in just a decade. And so, especially since the pandemic, so many parents are now choosing this option for their children. But there's still emerging research about how should these schools be run in order to make sure that students are succeeding.
And I know that some students have succeeded, and some parents and students rave about outcomes, but obviously in this case, things were not going as well as Roscoe Collegiate ISD wanted them to. What do you see as the big takeaway from all this in your mind?
Well, for me as a reporter, I think a main takeaway is one, just remembering and understanding for parents who may not remember or may not think about the fact that these schools are fairly new. So the structures and systems, that they're seeing on a large scale, it's still something that is being researched and studied. And then another thing is, when something is growing so fast, it's important to also make sure that there's, conversations about how should accountability look like when it comes to virtual schools. Should they have different metrics? Given that they're not in person, given that their student population, can be more mobile. I think a lot of those conversations are happening, but in this case, I don't think they happened before, the school eventually closed.
Elizabeth Sanders reports on education for the Houston Chronicle, and she's been doing some excellent reporting on this virtual schooling, and we're going to have a link to it at texasstandard.org. Elizabeth, thank you so much for talking with us on The Standard.
It was great to be here.
We're out of time for today's program, but you can keep up with the news 24/7 at texasstandard.org and look for us on social media at Texas Standard. Be sure to tune in tomorrow. We'll have more on the Supreme Court's decision to strike down President Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship. We'll also talk about how budget woes could impact a new and so far successful violence prevention program in San Antonio. Our producers and reporters include Sarah Ash, Shelley Brisbane, Michael Marks, and Sean Saldana. Raul Alonso is our digital producer, Leah Scarpelli is our director, and Casey Cheek is our technical director. This is Casey's last week with us, and I want to take a moment to thank him for his dedication to excellence and working every day to make the Standard the best it can be, and for making my job much easier. Casey is a top-notch director and a great person, and he will be missed. From all of us at the Standard, thank you for listening. I'm Angela Kocherga, wishing you the very best from El Paso.
Philanthropic support for Texas Standard comes from Casey and Scott O'Hare, the Winkler Family Foundation, Lynn Dobson and Greg Wooldridge, Adrian Killam, and the George Huntington family.